Greetings and welcome to this adventure focused on putting sounds within the Unity game engine. So I'm going to start by adding my project and opening it up. We'll be placing sounds around a first-person environment, sounds on a waterfall, some wind sounds, and just general Atmos sounds within here. So let's get started. Just a few basics. We have different tools at the top here. We can scan through them, Q, W, E, R, T, Y, if we want quick access. This tool here is the transform tool. This is quite good. It's essentially a multi-tool, so it lets us select things. We can rotate, transform, and change the size. So quite handy when we're dealing with audio. If we don't want to see this transform tooltip, we can hit the Q button, which gives us our view tool, which essentially just pans us around within the scene. I'm going to get this tool selected. I'm going to close this massive folder. I'm going to hit this little hand icon to stop accidentally clicking on things and opening that folder up again. And let's head over to the waterfall. Just so you know as well, when I hold down the right mouse button, the cursor will put a blue circle, and when I hit the left mouse button, you'll see a white circle appear. There's a few modifier key and keyboard shortcuts that you'll be using in here, such as moving whilst you're holding the right mouse button down. So I'm going to start by right-clicking, adding in a audio source. There we go. I'm going to call this Waterfall. So Waterfall game object is displayed in scene view here. We have the waterfall game object here and everything that's within it. So we can see the position, whereabouts it is in the level. We could go on each of the axes from here if we wanted. And we can minimize that because we don't need to look at the transform. We've got a audio source on our game object. So we need an audio clip for this to emit sound. Let's click this little circle. This will open up all the audio that's within our project files in our asset folder. And there is no waterfalls in here. So I could add a carpet sound, which is probably a carpet footstep, but that is not what we want. So I'm going to need to go and find some waterfall sounds, and a good place to do that is Soundly. So let's do some searching. Waterfall. And no, this one's half decent. When we're bringing sounds into a game engine, it's a good idea to bring them in mono if you're hoping for the sounds to be diegetic, as in inside of the level, so that you can hear the position where they're coming from and all that kind of stuff. You don't want to necessarily add mono non-diegetic sounds like that emotional layer, like where the music usually sits. That's good as stereo or even surround if you want, but stick to mono for diegetic sounds in the scene. In Soundly, we can simply hit channel 1 to choose channel 1. Let's play it, and we'll just grab what might be a good loop and drag that to the desktop. Typically, I'm going to bring this into my DAW and edit this nicely so it ends up on a perfect loop. But for the sake of this video, I'm just going to chuck it straight into Unity and get it to loop, and there's probably going to be a few ticks and pops on that loop. A couple other things. I'm going to want a campfire, so something crispy, and I'm happy with this. So I'm going to make a selection, choose one channel, drag that to the desktop. So we've got a fire. I'm going to have a look for couple other Atmos recordings. Let's see, I got a nice Atmos recording I did a while back in Gunnedah. So that'll probably come in handy somewhere. Grab that. And let's get some weather. Wind in leaves. And again, even with wind, it's good to use mono versions of this. You can have multiple sound sources around your scene, but often if it's in the scene, stick to mono. And then if you want it to appear like it's coming out of two speakers or that kind of vibe, then bring in two mono sources and place them at different places in the scene. One last thing I might do is grab the, not the frogs, the frogs. Here we go. Another recording that I've made earlier on, this time from my grandparents' farm in Orange, in fact. Alrighty, so we have these sounds here all ready for our game. I'm going to open up Unity again. Now, you can't just drag sounds straight into the scene here. In Unity, scenes are levels. So what we need to do is drag it into this folder called Assets. Now, this Assets folder lives within our project folder for this game project. And just to show you that, so I've opened up this project and it has an Assets folder, and you can see it's got underscore terrain, example assets, first person AIO, and we can see this also reflected here in the project browser. So these are just all the assets, water, trees, materials, sounds, everything that's been brought into this level to make it. I'm going to right click on assets and create a new folder, and I'm going to call this sounds, and I'm going to double click on sounds, and I'm going to bring these sounds in. We are ready to chuck some sounds around our scene or our level. So I'm going to click the Waterfall game object, and we see the audio source component within that, and we need a waterfall. So here we go. I'm just going to drag this straight here this time, and now we have a waterfall. Now if I push play, we'll hear this, but we're currently not going to hear it as if it's coming from within the scene. So you'll see what I mean in a sec. So there's no localization. It doesn't matter how far away we get. And actually it was a loop, and the loop has now finished. So there you go. Not, not a very convincing waterfall. Couple things that are quite good to tick just in general on an audio source that's emitting from within your game level. First of all, loop. So it doesn't just end like it did. Volume can stay at full level. Pitch, yes, we don't want to have a pitch modifier, just multiply it by 1. Stereo blend. Now this is really where we're choosing between the sound being non-diegetic. So this is the 2D sound that we just heard. It's not within the level. Usually good for the music. And we're going to make it diegetic. So yes, it's now coming from whereabouts the sound is placed in the level. So we will now be able to hear it panning left and right. Not everything's done yet, but if we move in towards the sound, little in the right, little in the left. It's very quiet. So this isn't ideal. Couple things to still do with this sound. So first of all, I'm going to come down and change the volume roll-off to linear roll-off. Even though sound behaves logarithmically in the real world, linear roll-off works better in Unity. So go with linear. It's a little tricky to see, but if I zoom in, there is a little circle around here. So I'm going to actually turn the game level off. And now we can see this inner circle here. And you might be noticing over in the audio source component that the min distance is moving right over here. And in fact, we can move this from both areas. So 1 within Unity means 1 meter when we're talking about distance. The min distance for this audio source is 1 meter. Max distance is 500 meters. So let's zoom all the way out. And yes, we can see that the audio source max distance is 500 meters. So as you may have guessed, the max distance is how far the sound will be heard from the center. And so I'm going to bring this in, or actually I'm just going to type in 10 meters. So what this means is when we're within the min distance, we will hear, or our character will hear the sound as being full scale or full volume. And the further we move out to the max distance, the more that the sound will attenuate until we're outside of here, and then we will no longer hear the sound. And you can see this representation here. This is amplitude here, and this is distance here. So we can see that this is representing that 10 meters. So let's turn the scene back on and decide whether this is far enough or not. And in fact, the waterfall should be heard, I reckon, around this far away. And the inner part of this, the inner radius, I'm just going to type it in here. So let's say 3 meters. No, let's say 5 meters. So it's, yeah. Let's push play and see how this goes. Alrighty, yep, so heard that fading in here. Yep, you can hear that. And let's get over there. You should be able to hear a nice solid pan from the left ear to the right ear. So this it isn't like a spatialized mix or anything like that. This is just a normal stereo left-right mix, so there's no binaural decoding or any fancy stuff happening. But yeah, you should be able to get that direction for whereabouts the sound is emitting. We have a spread value of 0 set. So what this means is that we set the audio source to be a point source, so it's emitting from a single point. If we want to set this to full spread left and right, so it's as if when we start hearing the sound, it's coming from all around us, which is quite good for, say, wind, The setting for this is actually 180. So this will be a full left and right spread. So let me show you what this sounds like. Kind of notice that the sound is coming from all around. So the spread can be used in a way to give a perceived sense of size to this point source here. What we might do is sort of reduce this down to, say, 30 or something like that. Keep in mind with this setting, if you go beyond 180, it actually starts to flip the stereo field left and right, and then it gradually brings itself back into a point source, although with a flipped left and right, although it's a point source, so it doesn't actually have a left and right, it's because it's coming from one single spot in space. So my advice is don't go anywhere beyond 180 with this spread setting, because it will just have funky style behavior. It's good to just consider this as being between 0 and 180 as the full range that you would use this. And you can use this just as if, how big do I want the audio source to be? So I'm going to just choose around, let's say around 34, push play, and I'll give you a quick listen to how this sounds. Still have a little bit of sound in our left ear, and still a little bit of sound in our right ear. It's not so. Excellent. So that is our waterfall done. And the good thing about this is we can now duplicate that work that we did with the waterfall, and we could move this somewhere else. We will get our waterfall 2. I'm just going to rename this as frogs. And max distance, I'm just going to make the frogs between 3 and 10 meters. And move these. So I'll just drag this over to this little dam here. Now, if I hit F, this is focus, but often it will focus out first and then in. Let me hit F. There we go. We went in the very first time, which is good. If it zooms you right out, just hit F again. So let's put the frogs into this little pond style area here. Nice. Double check it's not too low. Nope, that's looking good. And of course, we're going to want to chuck some frog sounds in here, because at the moment this is a waterfall within the pond. So this time I'm going to hit a little circle here, and I can search for frogs and double click right there. And we now have a frog audio clip within our small pond. Let's check out this handiwork. Yep, very nice. Might make that more directional just by bringing the spread back to 0, just because frogs high frequency would normally have more directionality. And I'll just pull out the max distance a little, just so we hear it a little earlier. We might decide to go and investigate where that sound's coming from. Now, if I wanted it, I don't need to have just a straight linear curve between the min and the max distance. So you can double click on this curve here, you get Bezier curves, and these allow you to shape the curve how you see fit. So we might want to hear the frogs very faintly, and then they sort of get louder quickly. So let's push play. There they are. Nice. So there's a second pond in here. So I'm just going to duplicate those frogs as is and drag these straight over to pond number 2. And I think we're now sorted. Oh, is that a third pond? No. Got excited then. Alrighty, so that's our frogs done. Now I'm going to call that frogs 2. Next thing is let's put some fire on this little campfire. There's our frogs. I'm going to hit the Y transform up here again and move this new frogs audio source over here. I'll hit F and F again to focus right down into that. And oh, I almost got that straight on the campfire. And I can now drag the campfire sound into the audio clip. And let's see, let's make the spread just a little bigger. And I reckon that's going to be pretty good. So let's go and check out this campfire. Quite good. I'm feeling like this waterfall is emitting a little too far now. So actually I can just hit waterfall and max distance 45. Let's just bring this back, say to 41. Okay. So next we've got some wind. There are some wind gusts or wind particles around where we start. So you can see them sort of there. We have another little one just over here as well. Let's see how big that one is. Okay, so if we place that around that rock there. Great, all right. So I'm going to create this audio source a slightly different way, but it will achieve exactly the same thing, just so you can see a second way of doing this. Right click and we go create empty, and we'll call this the wind. And you can see an empty game object is just simply its location, just the transform there. Now, this is in a pretty good spot. If the transform had spawned really far away, a good thing to do is you can just zero it out. So you just type 0 in all the transform, and then it essentially moves to the very center of the map, which is usually a good spot for it to be in. First spawning spot. So let's push F to zoom into where the wind is. Double check it's roughly where we want it. That'll do. And Now I need to add an audio source component because previously I had right-clicked and created an audio source object, and it had an audio source component already in there. So we're going to achieve exactly the same thing, but we are going to hit add component, and you can see these are all the categories of components that come with Unity, or if you've added in any extras from the Unity asset store. So we'll hit audio, and here we can see that we can choose an audio source. Now we've gone the long way to creating just an audio source. Either way ends up identical. So I've dragged my wind in there. I'll do the normal settings. So turn on loop. I want the spatial blend to be 3D, so it's in the scene, diegetic. I am going to, in this case, set the spread to pretty much 180, a little below it, just so that it feels like maybe it's a bit windier in the middle. Yeah, so that we don't feel like the wind is emitting from a single point source, which it doesn't appear to be in real life. And we'll change the volume roll-off to linear again. Max distance. Let's take this to 20 meters. And min distance, let's say 5 meters. So 5 meter radius is where the audio source will be at max volume. So let's just have a look at that on the map. Just mute the map. So actually 20 meters seems quite a bit too big. So we'll just move this back to around there. Quite difficult to see this sphere on this map. Alrighty, so that seems fine. It's going to play on awake, so when we hit play, the sound will play. It's going to loop and then fade out. So we just want to mainly test that the fade from loudest to softest feels fine, and if it's not, we might want to use those Bezier curves to change the style of fade. Yep, so fades out too quickly. Maybe in general, this is just a little bit too small. And it's also too quiet as well. So we'll look at setting up the audio mixer in just a second. I'm going to start by setting this max distance, but we will put a pretty solid curve down here. So it kind of fades out and then it kind of sneaks out as it's further away. So maybe max distance, let's actually go 30. Let's give this a shot. Yep, that's a bit nicer. Alrighty. Still too quiet, and I might just, so you can double click these objects as well to get your camera kind of zooming into it. And I think it just needed to go this way a little. So that's one wind thing. We'll deal with that volume using the mixer in just a second. And there was another wind area over there. So we can simply duplicate that. We'll go to the top-down view, and we can just drag this second wind gust kind of into this area. I think it was next to that rock there. Great. All right. And good to rename this. Let's put one more sound in here in the swamp area, because I did grab that Gunnedah Atmos. Be a shame not to use that. Create empty. Let's call this swamp area or swamp sounds. I'm going to create a new audio source, and I'm going to chuck the Gunnedah Atmos in here. Loop, spatial blend to 3D, spread. Yeah, let's make this kind of fairly encompassing as you're in the area, so it doesn't feel like it's coming from a single point when you're in here. And let's reduce this max distance, say, to around 20 meters. Have a quick look at how this looks. Okay, so we're going to go with, say, around 24. That looks pretty decent for when we hop into here. And of course, we'll go linear roll off. And I think I will just mess around with that curve a little bit just to ease it in as we're walking in. Let's just push play and see how that sounds as we're going into the swamp area. Nice. All right, so that seems fine. So you can see that there's going to be little bits of sound. You want sound everywhere on the map in an outdoor game like this. And of course, it makes sense to then dump a music layer on top of the whole lot as well. So let's have a look at mixing the sounds within the game. To do that, we'll use the audio mixer, and we can simply find it here on this tab. If you don't see this, you can click this add tab and you will find that the audio mixer will show up in here. That's how you add that tab. Alrighty, so I'm going to delete the old audio mixer so we can start from where you would typically see this. So let's create an audio mixer. Let's call this just the main mixer, because we're only going to need one. Now, within here, we have snapshots. We're not going to talk about these at the moment, but they're a way to change between lots of settings in one go, such as volume or effects. But we are going to talk about groups, and you can think of groups just as being the word for tracks on a normal mixing console. So if I say we're creating a new group, really that means we're creating a new track. So click on the master. Anytime you click on a track, when you hit plus, it will create a child track under that track that was selected. So here we go. We're going to call this one Waterfall. We will create another one called Frogs. We'll create another one called Wind. We can create another one called Swamp. Swamp Atmos. Let's create one called Fire. You can see I mistakenly was still selecting the Swamp Atmos, and it's put Fire as a subgroup. You can just change that parenting by clicking and dragging. So now we have Waterfall, Frogs, Wind, Fire, Swamp, Atmos, and of course we have our sounds here. So we want to assign these to the groups. So this is nice and easy. We click on the waterfall and the output. We click the little circle and choose waterfall. Click frogs, little circle, hit frogs there. We could Also, for the second lot of frogs, you can drag from here over to the output as a second way of assigning. So campfire, we will assign to the fire channel, wind to wind, same with here, and the swamp to the swamp atmos channel. So now if we push play, we'll be able to see the levels popping up on the mixer. But to do that, I'm going to have to come out of maximize on play. So I'm going to click this button, exit play mode, and now I can push play, and I'll play within the editor. Great, all right, so I'm going to click the main mixer to bring up the levels, and I can see the wind. If I move out of that area, you see that the wind also moves. We can see it's not panning because we've got the spread quite high, but if we move right out there, obviously no sounds. What are we near? Let's go over to the swamp. Now we can see the swamp atmos showing up. And if we jump over this little mountain here, see some waterfall. Oh, and you can see that the waterfall is directional in the mixer. And nice campfire. So, we want to do some in-game mixing. So we can hit edit in play mode, and then we can start adjusting things. So I know that the wind needs to come up a fair bit. I've kind of lost where I was on the map for a second there. Here we go. These up a little more. Turn the waterfall down just a smidge. That wind is now too high. Okay. So that's how you can adjust levels as you're moving around within the track, within the scene, sorry. And if you would like to do stuff like apply effects, you just add here to insert an effect on that particular group. So for example, if we wanted to chuck an EQ on the frogs, then we can. And we can then mess around with the EQ in here. I'm going to right click and get rid of that because we don't need it. You can set up send effects as well. So if we were to create a new track, and let's call this OGS return 1, and then we go and put on, say, an echo, then we can add in a receive, and the receive will need to be before the echo. You can see it's no send sources connected. So let's send the frogs to the echo. On the frogs, I'm going to stick a send, and we can adjust that send after we set where it's going. So it's going to OGS1, return 1. Bam. And now we can adjust the send level here. So let's give it a lot of send. And if we come back over to the echo, let's just make sure that we're going to hear it. And the dry mix, we don't want any dry mix because it's a send, and wet mix 100%. Excellent. All right, let's push play, and we should have echo on our frogs. Not that we would want this, but just to show you how You can set up your og sends. Okay, it was very quiet, but you can you may have been able to hear that, but yeah, if you wanted to get more volume, you could stick essentially a little utility on here to get more volume, perhaps normalize or use the makeup gain on a compressor to get more volume. Excellent. Now, the one thing that I haven't talked about is that we're hearing the sounds through an audio component that is called an audio listener. Let me show you how these are created. So audio and audio listener. Now, there's already one within the scene, and you should only ever have one audio listener within your scene or level. And pretty much in every case for a first person level like this, you're going to want the listener on your character. In this case, the camera is actually the character when we're in play mode. Let's try and find that. So there's the camera there. So this is why we always start next to the bridge and the wall. And you can actually see the view that you're going to see when you start the game here. We could change this by moving this back and kind of rotating this way. So that's that's how you move your character and where they're going to start. On the camera, if we have a look down here, we can see the audio listener, and there's no options. This simply says this is where you're hearing the sound from, and if the character has their right ear to an audio source in the scene, then of course pan that to the right. Now this is important because if you took the audio listener off the camera and you just put it on some other random object like that tree over there, then of course your ears are on the tree whilst your characters are walking around. So occasionally that kind of thing can catch you out where you're not getting sound within Unity, and the audio listener isn't anywhere near your character. Excellent. Alrighty. So that's about all I'm going to talk about at the moment. Good luck.